Well, welcome everyone. As we are waiting, why don't you share with us about yourself in chat? Also, feel free to put in your LinkedIn profile so we can all stay connected post event, and do start sharing questions as we get started. And I do have one request for all of you. Given that we're not able to do face-to-face meetings, if you guys can keep your cameras on, it'll be really nice to see all of you as we get the session started. So that's my ask for today. Thank you.
Awesome. Should I dive in, guys? Apologies for the technical difficulties.
There's our president. Hey, Meg, thanks for joining. We were wondering.
Yeah, you know how Zoom can be. Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us here today. Looks like it's a couple minutes after 6, so let's get started. First of all, thank you for joining. Welcome to all of our members who registered and are attending today, and also to all of those who are future or potential members. We hope we can continue to engage you in dialogue. For those of you who don't know, just a quick housekeeping, we have events every month still, even during COVID and virtually. So we're still having networking and educational events the second Thursday and third Thursday of every month. We'd also welcome feedback from today's session, or just in general about what you guys are looking for and how we can support you. So be sure to fill out the survey at the end of the event, and we'll be sending that around shortly after the meeting is closed. Should we scooch forward to the next slide? So here's just a quick look at our current 2020 to 2021 board. Lots of these folks are on the call tonight. If you are interested in potentially volunteering for one of our teams, it's a great way to get experience and get engaged in the community. You can feel free to reach out to me or anyone you see on the screen here tonight. I'll have all of the board members who are present throw in their LinkedIn or connection info in the chat, and I'd welcome everyone else to do that as well, just to get to know each other, and feel free to contact us afterwards also. Go to the next slide. So also, you know, a little more detail on some of this information. If you're interested in sponsoring a fun event like this, we do have a sponsor for tonight's event, which I'll get to shortly. Feel free to reach out to Parna. She's actually going to be our moderator tonight. Also, you probably heard from her while I was scooching onto the call. Jen Focon is our VP of membership. If you're interested in becoming a member, we'd love to have a conversation with you about how we can support that. And if you're interested in volunteering for one of our teams, you can reach out to me directly. Awesome. Well, without further ado, I'd like to thank our sponsor for tonight, Topos Labs. Really, Parna will dive in a little more about that, but thank you so much for sponsoring the event tonight. And Parna, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you so much, Meg. And I echo what Meg just said. We are so grateful that you're all here on this lovely day here in Boston. In the chat, Gina, do you want to turn on the deck, if you don't mind? Thank you. All right, I can see you guys now. That's nice. Welcome, everyone. Now I feel like I'm in the same room with you, so please keep your cameras on. So thank you again for being here. We do have a really exciting conversation with amazing speakers today. So let me ask each of the speakers to introduce themselves first. So we have Chris Stevenson, Chris Willis. That could be confusing, so we'll have some fun with that. Dan and Stu. So I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves. If you wouldn't mind, Dan, should we start with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself. And also, if you wouldn't mind sharing something fun about yourself.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Dan Scott. I just passed my 14-year mark at Fidelity Investments last week, and have been most of my time there in communications roles, internal and executive communications, but did a little bit of a pivot last year and took a new role. It was a newly created role leading content development and strategy for our global workplace investing program, which is essentially taking thought leadership, a lot of the thought leadership and insights that we've had here in the US around retirement, retirement readiness, financial well-being, total well-being, and bringing it to a more global audience, specifically some of our multinational clients. It's a fairly new program. We started just a couple of years ago with this program, and as I said, I joined last year. I know a lot of people, including Parna, from years ago. I've spent about 20 years in public relations firms before coming to Fidelity, and had the pleasure to work with Parna many, many years ago. So it was great to reconnect to work on this panel discussion. Something fun about me, I guess, I'm a pop culture fanatic. So I have the music taste of probably a 15-year-old, and which embarrasses my 15-year-old son when I sing along to songs. And I was just in the car with him today, and he had Juice World on, and I said something like, "Oh, I love this song," and he just wanted to shut it off completely.
It's like, Dad, what?
Ruined it.
My husband and I, my husband is Christian, and we have a 15-year-old son.
Excellent. Well, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Chris Willis.
You sure you want me and not Stevenson? Because however you want to do that.
Yeah, I know. Yes, let's do it, Mr. Willis.
Fantastic. I'm Chris Willis. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at a company called Acrolinx. Acrolinx is a Boston and Berlin, Germany-based AI-powered governance platform. We're enabling brands like Microsoft, Facebook, Apple, Citibank, HSBC to write better content faster, while essentially aligning all of their writers with their company's strategic content guidelines at scale. So think of thousands of people inside an organization writing with the clarity, consistency, and character of the organization. Something fun about me. I don't know, Parna and I worked together 11 years ago. That was fun. I am setting up a stock tank pool in my yard tomorrow, starting tomorrow. It's probably going to take a few days. I tried to get somebody to come over and install a pool this season. That is not a thing that can happen during the pandemic. So an 8-foot diameter, 2-foot deep metal tank that you use to feed horses with. Pop a couple holes in the side, install an above ground pool filter, build a deck around it. And apparently it's a thing that up to 2 people or 4 children can float in. So yeah, I have never built a deck. That's why I think this is the fun part. I'll send pictures when we're done. It's either going to be awesome or it's going to get thrown out.
Yeah, and we all will have our next meeting over there in your house.
If it works out.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you. Stu?
Hi, I'm Stu Richards, and I'm the CEO of Braden. We are, I want to say, Somerville-based, but we're not anymore, given that we're all home-based at the moment. So we're a Boston-based consultancy that helps companies to better understand and engage with the small to mid-sized business audience, or SMBs. And what we do for companies to help them, at the end of the day, to achieve their revenue objectives in the SMB space is either to conduct research to understand the mindset of SMBs or develop content. And we actually started out as a content shop and added research as a way to provide, really quick turn insights that we could share via content. So I'm really excited to be part of the panel and look forward to the conversation around that. In terms of fun, I don't know how fun it is. I'm sitting in my newly renovated basement. We had a sewerage pipe break a while ago, and it's finally been repaired and replaced, and it's where I get the best Wi-Fi in the house. And I guess a little more fun than that is we have a cabin up in Maine near Acadia National Park, which we try to escape in the summer. And that's where ideally I would be all summer if I could. But again, really excited about this panel and look forward to the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you, Stu. Chris Stevenson?
Okay, yes, thanks Parna for setting this up. You and Brandon Buzz Marketing and AMA have done an amazing job, much appreciated. And the downside is we didn't get to do it in person as we initially had hoped, but we'll take what we can get in this day and age, right? Chris Stevenson, 30 years background in technology and in starting companies and running them, managed services, AI-based technologies. Most recently, CEO of Topos Labs. We're an AI company, more specifically cognitive computing, which we can get into a little bit. So we have built a reading machine, an automated technology called Gracie, who reads and interprets human language, human text, and makes sense of it in a world that is highly unstructured. And so we apply to the content world in this way, and we can talk a little bit about that. Something interesting about me, I'm a second-degree black belt in Kung Fu, and I don't know what my belt is in guitar, but I would imagine it would be on the lower end. But I found them both confoundingly difficult and yet highly rewarding, so that gives you an insight into the masochistic nature of my existence.
No, that's really great. Well, thank you all and welcome. So before we get started, I just wanted to share some fun facts with you guys. So many of you may know that 90% of the online data that was created today was actually created within 2 years. That was 2011 to 2012. In 2018, there were 2.5 quintillion bytes of data that was created every day. So 1 quintillion equals 18 zeros. I have to read the numbers so I don't get it wrong, so bear with me. So around that time, I was actually creating a keynote presentation for one of my executives, and I looked at that number and I said, I don't know, how do I make sense of like 2.5 quintillion? So I talked to one of my MIT engineers, these smart ones, and I said, help me understand what that is. So he did his math and he said 2.5 quintillion bytes of data equals 330 round trips to the moon. So that's like how much data we've been producing every day. The forecast in 2020 was that, and that was before COVID, the prediction was that we'll be creating 44 zettabytes of data. That's 21 zeros. I didn't go back to the MIT guy to say, okay, never mind however many round trips to the moon. But obviously, the point is we are creating a ton of content and a ton of data every day globally. And it's a combination of financial documents, social media, shopping platforms, automotive, you name it, there's a lot. And if you just look at the specifics, for example, we send 16 million text messages a minute. Over 600 photos are shared via Snapchat. About 188 million emails are shared every minute. So you get the idea. Why do we care? With all those points that I just shared with you guys. Personally, I think, and maybe I'm wrong, majority of these content and data that's being produced, I feel we are doing it as marketers. We are kind of adding to this data deluge that we're seeing in the name of content marketing. So today we are going to focus on and hear from the experts on how do we break through this data, this digital clutter, so to speak. What kind of risks should we be looking at, and if there's any impact that we've seen during the COVID, during the pandemic that we can learn from. So with that, let me start with you, Chris S. We talked a lot about risks in the beginning as you guys were talking, but as a marketer, what is risk? Like, what do you mean risk in content? You know, we're creating fun content, infographics and newsletters and videos, but what's risk? So if you wouldn't mind sharing your insight on helping us understand the kinds of risks, what should we be aware of so that we all understand what that is?
Sure. So, and I think what's going to be fun is that the other Chris Willis will have an entirely new slant on this because of what his organization does. So we think about this in terms of just in one sense, one of the risks is just the creation of too much stuff and not having places for it. So we call this the data swamp. They were calling it data lakes for a while. We're now calling it a data swamp because one of the challenges and risks associated with just content in general is, where is all my stuff? How can I find it? Am I reinventing the wheel? So there's just a general lack of efficiency, if you will, around sort of what you talked about, the deluge of data and content that we are all creating. And then there's this whole world, since everyone's a publisher now, it's ubiquitous that the content creation tools, technologies, software, applications, devices, and the social media streams and opportunities to disseminate that information are so voluminous and so ubiquitous that there are some circuit breakers that need to go into place. Now, I don't need to tell that to organizations that have large compliance and legal departments that need to do this due to regulations and requirements of that nature. But it does underscore the fragmented world we live in terms of how easy it is to unintentionally offend certain demographics, certain groups, to say insensitive things, and then you've got the whole side of leakage of customer data that shouldn't be going out the door, that maybe got folded into another document. We've seen this happen quite a few times where you have proprietary insights of your customer data, that customer demographics that somehow get included into other internal documents and then get forwarded as part of a communication. So it's just this idea of there's so much data, it's hard to keep track of it, and then it's hard to manage how it leaves your organization and by what means. So I'm going to stop there because there's so many different ways you could talk about this, but I'll stop there and see if that came close to answering what you were asking.
Well, I think that's really good. Thank you for that. Dan, you obviously are creating a ton of content globally. When you look at, based on what Chris just said, are you looking at risk factors, especially given, the industry that you're in and you're creating data for the global audience? Like, what kind of risks do you have to keep in mind as you're creating this volley of content that I know you are and your team's creating?
Well, not too much, right? We don't want to have too much of that. We don't want to fill that swamp too much. It's right person, right time, right message, right? But I would build on Chris actually said it, in that we are at Fidelity is one of those organizations that has a pretty regimented approach to content and compliance that needs to be done on that content, and obviously meeting the regulations of the financial services industry. So that's kind of a baseline. What's been interesting from a global standpoint is that a lot of the work that I do is with Fidelity International, which is kind of owned by the same family, but a separate company. But it's interesting to see that, so the risks that I deal with from a global standpoint is that the regulations are different country to country in the financial services industry, and even internally at Fidelity, there's self-sign-off compliance. There's what I would call a little more loosey-goosey compliance than we have in the US, which sometimes makes me a little nervous with some of our content. But I think other than that, which is built in, and I know Chuck Cabot is on this call, who's at Fidelity and leads a lot of our social media work and is dealing with compliance issues all the time and trying to speed that up so that we can respond in real time on social media platforms. But the global perspective brings a whole other set of issues in that there are risks in how we talk about the content, how we address the different, whether it's insights that we have, how we present those insights. There's risks in that there's cultural differences. There's there's even how that information is consumed is really different. So, you know, we can do all we want and spend a ton of time on white papers, on the research that we've done, but in Hong Kong, they couldn't care less. They want to have something that's like a quick infographic that can go up on social media. Same with, I mean, it's things like how we color code things, where we put out a retirement survey and put out retirement scores for different regions, and had to think about the red, green, and yellow scheme that we were using for, you know, a good score versus a bad score, but red is a good thing in Asia. So, you know, it's those kind of things that are small, but can be a real risk in terms of how people consume the content that we're putting out there.
That's really cool. Chris, the other Chris, obviously if you want to comment anything on the risk factor, but my question to you also is that, how do you audit your content? Is that something that you guys spend a lot of time on to make sure that there's no risks at the content?
Yeah, actually, I mean, it is. And I think it needs to go one step further back to the basis of the challenge that we have, is that back in the olden days, people had writers. There were people who had a job to write. And now inside most of our companies, we don't have that. Writing gets done by people that work, that have jobs, and we're begging and borrowing content creation. And when we get that, we oftentimes don't have a full editing process. So somebody's reviewing content, we're making sure it doesn't have obscenities in the middle of it, and we're publishing it. And that's if we're lucky, it doesn't have obscenities in the middle of it, and we're publishing it. And that creates risk just as a basis of the beginning of the content creation process. From there, you run into the use of the content. Like, what are we designing this to do? And, you know, clarity affects the use of content. So if you're talking about product manuals, can I follow this? One of our customers is Philips Healthcare. And there's a podcast episode that actually launched today. You can find it if you can find me on LinkedIn. Anyway, Philips talks about the life or death situation of product manuals that support medical devices. Doctors use these. If doctors can't follow these, lives are at risk. That's real risk of content. And so from there, you start thinking about, okay, so we've built all this content that Parna talked about. Millions and gazillions and quadrillions of pieces of content across the world. And it sits there. And if you're, let's take Dan and financial services organization, you're a heavily regulated industry. You've created content under one set of regulations that existed yesterday. The world changed tomorrow, and you have repositories full of content. And now you have repositories full of risk. We have one customer that talks in terms of his job is to keep everybody out of prison. They go through and they do, to the point of the question, content audits to make sure that everything in their repository is safe. And they do that by essentially creating a rule set and comparing content to rules. And that's something that, I mean, is ridiculously challenging. Just going through the volume of content at scale that these organizations have. The need for automation is real in that space, to be able to go through and just rip through repositories, find regulatory issues, find compliance issues, find clarity, character issues, brand issues that can be corrected to make this content aligned with the business that we are today and the regulations that we live under today, not the company that we were yesterday. And that really goes for all of us. It doesn't matter if you're a bank or a pharmaceutical company or a software company. We all have repositories of content that were built yesterday. And yesterday's content is only good until it's not.
Good point. Thanks. Stu, you create obviously a ton of content also for your SMB clients. What kind of guidelines or parameters do you have to make sure their content is also compliant and risk-free, like we are talking about?
Oh gosh, it's such a great question. There's so many components of risk to the content that we develop for our clients. There is the legal risk, of course, as Dan is very well aware of, for example, and especially for financial services clients, of providing fiduciary advice via content. You really want to be careful to say, hey, talk to your CPA, talk to your advisor to get specific actionable advice. But at the same time, you really do want to provide useful recommendations that they can follow without, putting your company in any state of legal liability. But I think on a kind of broader content development basis, one of the big risks we see is developing content that's simply not aligned with small to mid-sized business user preferences. So we do a lot of research around that. One of the biggest concerns that SMBs have with content is simply, is it comprehensible? So, do we, for example, use jargon that they might not be familiar with? It's really easy to do, especially for technology companies like SaaS, is second nature to so many companies. Small businesses, for the most part, don't understand what that terminology means. So you have to be really careful to use, without talking down to them, the kind of language that they will understand that's meaningful. Also, are you aligned with the ideal, kind of the prototype of the user that you have? So if you're trying to talk to an office manager versus an IT administrator versus a financial decision maker, are you addressing their concerns in a way that's relevant and germane? And at the same time, are you addressing their industry? Are you addressing their company size? So there's a lot of risk if you're developing content that's not aligned from a legal liability standpoint, from a terminology standpoint, from a relevance standpoint. And also, of course, from the client standpoint, are you correctly aligned with the sales cycle? So are you using the right level of awareness generation? Are you using the right formats when you're initially trying to educate prospects around the benefits of your offerings, for example, or a relationship with your organization? And are you helping them to better understand as they move through the sales cycle by using more and more explicit kind of features and benefits as you move them through the sales cycle, by sending them to the sales representative, for example, and really making it easy for them to understand how your offerings can benefit them and how they can go about purchasing. So there's a whole set of risks that we really try to avoid. And one of the ways that we do that, in addition, of course, to working with our clients' legal departments for review and approval, as well as marketing for tonality and all of that, but by continually researching among SMBs just to understand what's most relevant and, for example, what kind of formats and topics are most compelling to them.
Oh, all great points. Thanks, Stu. So we just talked about this whole data deluge and trips to the moon and so on. A recent report by McKinsey, they said that because of the whole work from home mode, the pandemic, consumers and businesses, their digital adoption have vaulted 5 years forward, which means we have more people online. We are kind of in a hyper-connected world. Given the already huge amount of data that we have and more people that are in the digital world, what thoughts do you have about the types of content that we can create that would be more engaging? Like, you literally have to break through that digital clutter now, because everybody is trying to do digital marketing, more content, digital interaction. What thoughts do you guys have about, how do we break through that clutter? And now it's an open question. Any of you can start.
Yeah, I mean, so you're hitting it on the head. For the last 7 years, we've been talking about this digital shift. And I mean, every single one of us has somehow sold something to somebody talking about this digital shift that's happening. And news for you, it's here. And we are now 100% reliant on what shows up in front of us on one of our several screens. And I think the biggest risk that is in that, and the way to cut through that, to be engaging, is to essentially be singular to your audience. And that, to my original point of how many people in your business write content, that's really difficult, because you've got all kinds of people writing in all kinds of different voices, saying all kinds of different things. And even for the best content organization with the best content governance, that's still a huge challenge. And this idea of representative brand. Brand is your biggest asset in your business. And a fragmented brand can cost you tens of billions of dollars at a major enterprise in both the acquisition of new customers and the retention and entertainment of existing customers. And so this alignment idea that I talked about, that Stu talked about, that Chris talked about, bringing everything together to align to a model becomes the primary objective to create that engagement, because you're creating individual one-on-one relationships with essentially everybody that you're doing business with, and being able to personalize that experience at scale across multiple personas is a huge challenge, but is the differentiator that allows you to create that engagement that you're looking for.
I think that's even more relevant with when you're talking about multiple audiences. So, I think that, we're creating content for policymakers, for clients, multinational clients, for, plan participants or members, as they call them, outside the US. So, and then there's also kind of the general, if you want to call general public, sometimes, because we're feeding thought leadership content into the PR teams to get out to the media. So I think that, there's what's engaging, and I've talked a little bit about it earlier, what's engaging in some areas, in some countries is different. I point to an example of, we did a launch in Germany for retirement savings guidelines. And I was really surprised that they took our white paper, the marketing, printed it out and gave it out at client events, as opposed to, and as opposed to thinking about, let's tweet something or let's, whatever it is, making it more in a digital format. So there's even that to think about in some of the countries that I've been working in, and that there's still a little bit of a paper approach. In some areas of, and in some industries, it's obviously not the same everywhere, because there is such an adoption of this digital approach for years now. But I think, having multiple audiences also plays into, what's engaging, and obviously policymakers, what is going to be engaging from a content standpoint for them is different than a plan participant in Hong Kong who just wants to get, a quick infographic or some interesting visual with ideally a call to action. That's the other piece for us, is that we do want content to be engaging, but we usually want and feel like they deserve some kind of call to action that will help them be more in tune with, in our case, retirement readiness, be able to give them the resources and education that they need, because we're finding through all of our research that there's a huge need for that. People don't understand what they need to be doing to save.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Thanks, Stu. So just to pick up on that, Parna, so this idea of creating engaging content is fascinating to me, because one of the customers that we're dealing with is a startup that has identified 5 personas or enclaves of the way people consume content. There's a whole study with, they're following a sort of a tried and true methodology around behavioral content consumption. And so it's not even just making something engaging in terms of, the topic that it's hitting. It's actually the nature of the language itself that can endear or offend in very subtle ways. And so beyond, once you get them to click and to start reading, you can very rapidly, and it would be hard for humans to even recognize this, which is where AI and machine learning comes in, where you can identify the types of language that certain demographics will adhere to or cling to. And it's not even the topic so much as it is the nature of the words being used. So I just want to throw that in there, because it is directly applicable to the fact that so many of us are responsible for creating and pushing out content. And there are such a fragmented landscape now, more so than ever, that it's hard enough just to create interesting new topics and subjects, but then to think about the way in which those are being worded to not offend and or to And then you get into the concept of trying to please everybody, which you can't do, right? So these are really intricate and challenging problems, and this is where, you know, the world of artificial intelligence and machine learning can be applied and will need to be applied, because there's simply not enough hours in the day and enough people to be thinking about this stuff.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, Chris. I think the use of analytics, you know, whether it's AI or other formats, is absolutely essential. And, you know, we like to complement that with primary research as well on, you know, again, we're kind of myopically focused on the small to mid-sized business audience, but it's really interesting to see how different they are. You know, it is not at all a homogeneous audience. So, you know, for example, the principals of the smallest businesses, we tend to think of them as under 20 employees. They tend to be a little older, they tend more to be baby boomers, and they tend to gravitate towards the written word, whereas principals of companies with 100 to 500 employees tend to be younger, and they tend to go to YouTube at pretty much every stage of the sales cycle. So really understanding, you know, the format preferences that they have, again, whether it's via analytics or primary research, is absolutely essential to being able to stand out. Again, you know, using the right tonality and verbiage, but also, you know, really being relevant in terms of helping to communicate that you understand the business challenges that they have in their particular industry, and you can either provide advice or solutions that help in their particular domain.
It's a really good point. Before I move to the next question, we kind of referred to AI quite a bit. Chris, if you wouldn't mind just explaining artificial intelligence, especially to us marketers, not the whole technology, that's for another day. But we talk about, you know, democratizing artificial intelligence. Like, do you have to be a STEM professional, an engineer, to be able to use artificial intelligence? What's your thought on that? And then we'll move on to other questions, if you wouldn't mind clarifying.
Sure. So, you made the mistake we said we weren't going to make, right? Or you intentionally did it, so Chris and I would talk over it. But I'm going to assume it's me, because Chris has an AI company too.
I saw you lean in first. I was okay.
So, but no, absolutely. So first of all, the answer to the question is currently, yes, you need a fair degree of technical knowledge out there right now to be able to manage and corral and create technology using AI and machine learning. It just is the nature of the world right now. What we're trying to do as a business is create that democratization of AI and bring that to the analyst, to the person who's actually writing the piece. Again, as part of what Chris's company does as well, is put these tools in the hands of non-programmers, the people that need access to these, up until recently, very technical technologies to use. And making it accessible. I think that's going to really be needed in order to make them more useful across, you know, everyone can't hire a machine learning expert to be sitting on their shoulder to create these technologies. We've got to make them more accessible. I feel like we're in the Jiffy Lube moment where, you know, everyone used to change their own oil. And there were a lot of tools out there that allowed you to do it. There's a ramp in the garage. You could pull your car up on it, and, you know, better dipsticks and better cloths. And then Jiffy Lube came and provided okay, now I can drive in, drive out. It was accessible for everyone and make it simple. And this is kind of where we're turning the corner, where we can take these very challenging technologies and make them usable by your everyday sort of domain experts, I'd call them.
Excellent.
Yeah, 100%. The best systems, regardless of the type of system, are the ones that fill a spot in the business that just makes sense and are usable. And when you think about AI in the content space, at least the way that it applies to us, we've created, I mean, if you want to personify our solution, there's a person that knows your business, knows the way that you want to write, knows the words you like to use, the level of clarity, the audiences you're creating for, the purposes of your content. And it sits on every one of your shoulders 24 hours a day. It reads your content and tells you it isn't good until it is. And so you as a writer, I'm not adjusting your process. Our product integrates into every authoring environment. So you work the way you work. You don't need to learn anything. And you're getting feedback from somebody that doesn't care what color your shoes are, didn't have a bad day, isn't hungover, isn't snarky, is just providing you with guidance of the company writes this way, you're writing this way, you're not aligned, let's bring it in. And when that content leaves your desk, it's quantified, there's a score that shows that it's aligned so that your next level of management can understand how far it's come and how far it needs to go. And so as an end user, you don't know how smart our system is. You don't need to. It just needs to be able to guide you. So we spend all of our time and energy creating something that has almost no impact on the way that you work. It just provides value. So no, you don't need to have an advanced degree.
Cool. All right, let's take some questions. One of the questions that I'm looking at is, what's next in the evolution of content creation? What skills or technology should we be learning about now to stay ahead? Any of you can take that.
Sounds like we should be working with AI. Should we have Gracie should have been on this panel.
Yeah. Well, I think it really comes down to, I mean, obviously Chris's company, mine, and others are actually in that suite of technologies that are part of trying to make that more accessible, so you don't need that anymore. I mean, I don't need to know how an iPhone works. I don't need to be a programmer to create the contact thing on my phone. I just know how to use a contact. This is how the world is going. So as a writer, your important thing is, who's my audience? How do I engage with them? How do I get the insights that tells me, you know, how I should be speaking and the tone of voice and all of that. And then I'll just do what I do. And so I think the challenge is closing that gap between bringing these tools to the average person who is really, you should not need to know artificial intelligence. You should just need to know your craft and get your way around, you know, I mean, there's no getting around using a mouse and a keyboard, but besides that, you ought to be able to create meaningful content and really understand the nature of the audience with new insights and analytics that should, as Chris said, just be someone over your shoulder that's guiding you through the process.
I do think that, oh, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
I mean, I think the technology that you need isn't technology about how to create content. The best writers in any organization right now are domain experts that understand your audience. And if you have the right support in your organization, whether it is software or manual process, you can take those two things, audience understanding and domain understanding, and turn that into great engaging content. If you lack those two things, that's a problem. That's where bad content is created and lives. And so the ability to have that framework to support people, I mean, my best writers at my last company were our product marketing people who were not native English speakers, didn't write in native English. Everything was very difficult to read. The framework that we needed to put in place supported bad writing that was created with an understanding of domain and audience. We could fix that middle piece. Can't fix the other two.
I think the other component of it is, and there's actually another question that relates to it. Someone had asked about, you know, what other voices or expertise or capabilities should be brought in rather than the traditional in terms of, you know, going to marketing folks for content and going. So I think that it's incredibly important right now, and I know we're trying to do this more, is to bring in different voices and different thoughts. So whether that's subject matter experts that maybe aren't completely aligned, in our case, to financial services, but they are more about wellness, or they're about, you know, they're all of the things that are creating for us what, you know, is going toward more of a total well-being, and financial wellness is part of that. I think that plays out in so many different areas. And I think bringing diversity of thought, especially right now, as you know, there's a lot of this stuff is in a vacuum, and I don't want to open it up to a bigger discussion about that, but I think diversity of thought and different mindsets, being able to give input into content, and whether they're building it or contributing to it, is incredibly important to make it engaging for a variety of audiences.
Yeah, I would say, from our standpoint, we're an agency, so we're creating content outside of an organization. And, when we start, of course, we lack a basic knowledge of like, what are the key communication points around a particular product set, or what's the tone of voice. So, what we would love as an agency, and what we're constantly pushing our clients for, is better definition of who exactly is the target, what are our key communication points, and what's our tone of voice. So the crisper a profile we have of our target audience and of the language used, literally down to like words that are either to be promoted or not to be used whatsoever, and an understanding of the buying journey and the specifics of the persona. When we are given a really clear brief in terms of who the audience is, what the communication points are, and of course, to the degree that we can collaboratively develop a really crisp editorial calendar around what kind of topic, what kind of format, how's it going to be promoted, when is it going to be sunset, how do we measure success, then we can really succeed. That, of course, is all dependent on really an effective technology platform. But having those fundamentals in place are absolutely essential to developing any kind of effective content marketing program.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Just going back to what Dan said, yes, we don't really want to talk about what's happening today because that's a much broader conversation. However, I guess I'd like to ask you guys, once COVID hit, whatever, 8 weeks or so ago, almost everything had to shut down. Like, we weren't sure what kind of content we were going to make. Companies were pulling ads, and car companies were pivoting to show empathy and so on. In your respective worlds, did you see a direct impact of what kind of content you were creating once the pandemic hit? And it's a two-part question. And what are you planning now that we're kind of entering the new era, so to speak? Pandemic is still there. We still have to be empathetic. People are still working from home. But what kind of guidelines are you giving your team to create content in kind of the new normal, the world of new normal?
Yeah, if I can jump in on that, one of our clients has had us do a pulse or snap poll kind of a survey. We've done 5 of them since the onset of the coronavirus, and the goal is to help them educate other small businesses on how their peers are coping, which is one of the things that we find over and over and over again with small business research is that small business owners want to hear from their peers, other business owners, more than they want to hear from anybody else. And so if we can play back for them via research what other businesses are doing in terms of their hiring plans or benefit plans, or how they're limiting their expenses, or how they're going to reopen safely for customers and employees, that's really beneficial. And there is a huge halo effect in providing that kind of information, peer-driven information from a client to a business owner to help them cope and to get ideas from their peers as to how they can pivot from, for example, being a sit-down restaurant to providing, curbside delivery, or, other ways for them to think about making it through the pandemic. So, what we see happening again in our, kind of limited domain in the content world focused on SMBs is providing research and support to help small businesses understand how they can pivot and how they can survive.
We had a major pivot with the pandemic, just given the nature of our business. We were on the cusp of launching this global retirement survey that I referenced earlier, which creates a retirement score for different countries. And so, we were going to be launching that in April, and essentially shut that down, given market volatility, given economic volatility. You don't want to be saying people need to be saving more when they're just trying to get food on the table and maybe furloughed or laid off. So major pivot, but also a major pivot in terms of content creation for helping people get through the pandemic, given what was happening with things like the CARES Act and others. So helping people understand their options, their withdrawal options, and there were a bunch of government things happening, legislation happening, but at the same time, people really started to look to us, and this happened not only in the U.S., but given the impact of the pandemic globally, we were doing a lot of work supporting content development in the UK specifically, and even in Hong Kong and Japan. So yeah, it was a major pivot that now we're starting to see. We've just had a couple countries launch the retirement survey, because it's, we also created this survey and score based on a bunch of different factors. So, we do have a lot of people asking, like, well, is it different now? And of course it is different for people who are close to retirement. We need to think about content that's going to be relevant to them, that can help them in a time of real impact.
Yeah, we've seen sort of more globally a push to think through the words that companies use in their communication. There's a lot of language that has not been in the past seen as problematic, that now is seen as problematic. And as a part of our solution, which manages terminology, the call is to go in and identify that language and both remove it from past content and avoid it in future content. And it's sort of all over the place, and it's a moving target. But this focus on watching the words that we use, the language that we use, and matching that with our audiences, in addition to really rushing through a study that we've been doing that is leading towards the productization of empathy rating. So the ability to read content and rate the level of empathy in that content, because that's become a primary objective of a lot of organizations in the content or in the content groups, is creating content that is seen as empathetic. And we have a group of PhDs right now that are working through the process of getting our software to read and understand and rate that, so that we can identify the level of empathy in a piece of content and then help to improve that, as is usually the case in desire. Because right now, words matter in many more ways than they did 3 months ago. And the ability to match that across an organization has become really important.
For sure. Chris, do you have anything to add?
Well, just that my sense is, and this isn't to brand an entire younger generation with this, but my sense is that there's been a little bit of a wink and a nod on the way the world works. A bit of, everything is made, poked fun at, and there's a sort of a meta of everything, and a snark that is kind of was the norm, and that has had to flip completely from, I think you really have to double think about the things that we used to take for granted might not be taken as seriously. So I can see, Chris, especially your company, that's a very big challenge. And of course, all of you, Dan, your content's probably a little bit more, straight and narrow for the most part and been locked down. But Stu, you guys might have had some edgier customers that I can imagine this affects all of you. But the thing that's affecting us, more importantly than the content we're creating, is the customers that we have. When you get a customer, an employee base that gets distributed and now they're all at home, there's a significant additional risk of that other side that's not really directly germane to this conversation, but data loss, data leakage of important company information, that you had a better handle on that when everyone was in the building and you can control that from a firewall perspective. Suddenly those trade secrets and sensitive content can be unintentionally leaving the door. Again, not directly germane here, but it is content, and pandemic has created that as an additional layer of issue around security.
And Chris, to jump in on that, you raise a great point because not only has the coronavirus, of course, changed the focus of our content, but with the Black Lives Matter movement, we have to be hypersensitive to anything that might be potentially offensive in terms of content that we just wouldn't have thought about, just a year ago. So it adds another layer of complexity to making sure that what we're putting out is going to be equally useful to everyone and not offensive to any audience.
Yeah, make sure. I think that's a conversation for maybe half a day or two a day, because there's so much going on, and as marketers we have to be so careful. And I think, as somebody said, it's not that words matter more today, but we just have to be more careful and the impact every word makes, because words probably could be misrepresented. So thanks for that insight. Since we are almost running out of time, let me end with one question to all of you. What tip would you give to a budding marketer who's getting ready to enter this very hyper-connected world where almost everything is remote?
Oh boy, I'll jump in on that one. It's just,
I love it. All of you, speak at once.
Yeah. No, it would just be, relevance. And again, we're very focused on SMBs, but it's really the key to the kingdom. So to the degree that you can really have a picture in mind of the person to whom you're writing. So, if you can understand, again, what's their industry, what's their company size, how well are they capitalized, what are the real pressing business challenges that they have, and, what's their understanding of your set of offerings. So, without using terminology that's going to confuse them about your, if it's a technology offering. So, really just making sure that your content is going to be relevant, meaningful, comprehensible to your audience. That's the single most important thing we try to focus on as a content shop.
Good point.
I would say don't box yourself in coming into it. So I talked about that diversity of thought before. So I think there can be sometimes a traditional look at what a communicator is or a marketer is, and I think those definitions should and are changing. So I think that for someone coming into, and I can't speak as much to, haven't been a true marketer over the years, but that come in with what they feel is with a lot of observations. What have they seen out there that's working, that's resonated with them or their audience, their friends or their family, and those kind of things, and shake it up a bit, and not be afraid to come with new and interesting insights.
Good point.
I'll jump on that, Dan. You just almost stole my thunder there, but
sorry,
just pulled back right at the end. The first thing I was going to say is become an expert consumer of content, right? You understand what's out there and get a sense for what's working, what's not, and really just don't add to the problem. Recognize, be yourself a consumer of it and be an expert in it so that you know how to, again, flip the script, like Dan said, or to at least be cognizant. Does this, and then the second, does this need to be said? In a world where we're just creating too much junk, too much content just for clicks, really be thoughtful about the data, the content you're creating. That alone will be more engaging if you just think twice, measure twice, cut once concept.
Good point. Chris?
Learn how to code.
He was pondering. We could see his brain moving.
That was helpful. No, I think everybody said essentially what needs to happen, and it's that ability to come in, have an idea of what's working for you because you are somebody's audience, and then overlaying that on top. The best thing that a young marketer can bring to an organization is an understanding of the audience that they serve, and I think that we as more senior leaders in marketing organizations rely on that. I can't be in touch with everything, although I'm all over TikTok. I'm pretty sure I got it. But it's hard to be everywhere, and bringing in that view that represents the audience is a huge benefit. Can we rewind that and delete?
I think that's engaging. I think that's engaging content, Chris. I think you just nailed it.
You want to just send me this video and I can edit that out? That'd be great.
Well, we just created this piece of content. We just added to the data deluge today, and your TikTok dance was perfect.
Fantastic. My employees are now slacking me.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. This is an amazing conversation. I'm sure we can go on and on. But thank you, Chris and Dan and Stu, for your insights and for being here. And if you guys have any other questions, comments, you know how to reach us. But let me turn it over to, I know it's 7. Helen, if you want to just walk us through our next upcoming events, please.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Helen Pinchansky, VP of Programming for AMA Boston, and I'm really excited. Thank you so much. Such a wonderful panel this evening, and wanted to say about the upcoming events. Next Thursday, we're going to be having a fireside chat. And again, we're talking a little bit about the augmented reality for marketers. So that's a wonderful conversation to continue from today as well. And our monthly mingle coming up on August 13, where we have wonderful speakers, and Michael Brenner is going to be our guest speaker for that one. And we have webinars coming up. If you visit our website, all the events are listed there. And please complete the survey afterwards that you're going to be receiving via email. And thank you so much, everyone.